Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good? All pepped up after the talks we had in the panel in the morning keynote discussions? I hope you had a chance to listen to those. Um, Let me begin by saying that we are not going to talk about future. And I think our future is brighter the way we see it from where we are. And I hope most of you will associate with that as well. I have the honor and privilege to introduce two of my very distinguished panelists. I'll start off with Ramesh. Ramesh is a distinguished engineer at eBay, and eBay is, as you all know, an e-commerce global marketplace that today has 2 billion, with the capital B, listings on their site, and they were responsible for generating $73 billion worth of sales last year itself. Why I say that? It's just a 20-year-old company. It's not existed for many years. It's sitting on rich data sets, lot of tools, because it's not just operating in one country selling one product. It's operating in 20 plus different countries, which I think is a huge an ask itself, tall order for especially people who are running the technology infrastructure behind the scenes to make sure it actually gets done. So Ramesh is here to share with us his experience of building eBay's Gen AI architecture. So he's got a lot of scars on his back. So he may say some things which still are forward-looking, but I think, trust me when I say that, during the prep sessions, the stories he's sharing about how he's actually, or what work he has done to implement, those are very real. They are not science fiction. He's not talking about Star Trek. He's making it very real, and I hope you'll all enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Second person I want to introduce to you is, and I'm sure many of us, I think our financial wellness is associated with the company that he is working in. No surprises, that is Vanguard. He is the head of product, director and head of product at Vanguard for the enterprise analytics business, which is, Vanguard is the second largest financial services company in the world today. Mike has 25 years of experience, has been working across data, AI, ML, analytics, data science, no surprises there, building a lot of applications, responsible for the cloud infrastructure. All of these applications are very mission critical in nature in itself. The components that are responsible, making sure the financial transactions are done in a secured way, and people who own it actually get it in the end of the day. So he's tasked right now with providing enterprise with scalable and responsible Gen AI platform. None of us, by the way, is selling eBay or Vanguard, but you're welcome to use those companies for whatever you do. So let's go right in. Michael, I want to start off with you asking, can you share with us some of the AI-powered tools that you are using to enhance the productivity of your employees in your organization?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Sheetal. So excited to be here today to talk about this topic. I think we're all obviously very interested in AI and what it can do for us and excited about the promise that it holds. Today, we have many use cases already in production that are affecting our end users on a daily basis, but we're seeing it impact them more and more each day. I'll kind of just talk about some different ways and categories. And I'll talk mostly around generative AI because I think that's probably where most of the hype is, but there's also some real valuable applications of it today that we are putting to good use. But if we think about some of the ways that we have been over the past few years starting to implement AI and start to derive some real value from it, we started with plain old traditional AI, right? That old thing that we did a little while ago before generative AI. And mainly you'd see agents and advisors taking advantage of this type of technology where we would put just the right information in front of them when they need it, when they're trying to advise a particular client or a prospective company we might want to bring on board on our participant side or 401k and institutional, right? Making sure that they have good recommendations for what they should be talking about, making sure that they have relevant information that's personalized for that individual client or business, right? So that's something that we've had in place for several years now, and it's been quite successful, and there's very measurable ROI there. But what's really exciting is that plain old traditional AI isn't going to get thrown out. It's actually going to be augmented with generative AI, where it can actually start to leverage the power of LLMs to be more intelligent, to provide even more relevant information. So the other categories of large language model applications I would talk about is probably in the developer productivity space. We're seeing tremendous gains in productivity there, very measurable, and we can get into metrics if you like later. But essentially we're seeing the, obviously code generation, code correction, bug identification and remediation, and modernization of older code. That's where we're seeing such tremendous gains, where if you think about a company like Vanguard that's been around for 49 years, you tend to accumulate some old code over that time. And it's somebody's job now to take a look at that code and try to understand what that developer wrote many years ago. And wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just have an application tell you exactly what that developer was thinking without having to spend all that time going through thousands of lines of code. And so we are using that today to go through old programs, old views with thousands of lines of SQL code in there, right? And it's helping us to accelerate the modernization. So that's where we see a lot of value in the code development and developer assist. And another major area we're seeing huge productivity gains is in content generation. So all of our marketers, all of those that need to generate marketing campaigns or email campaigns or brochures, et cetera, there's a huge number of folks now taking advantage of that technology to quickly accelerate through that process of generating the right messages for those audiences. Mm-hmm. It's not final. It needs a human in the loop, and that's a theme that you'll see as we apply generative AI. We always have a human in the loop, right, to ensure that that what comes out of the generative AI output is of value and is correct and isn't a hallucination, right? The word of the year. Another category I'll touch on is in search and summarization. So for those that have been working in generative AI for the last year or so, you're probably familiar with the RAG pattern, or retrieval augmented generation. That is a very important technique that we do apply and that we're continuously honing and getting better at, so that we can ground our models to ensure that they are only going to answer based on relevant information, right? We do have an application in production there where we're enabling those same agents I was talking about earlier to be able to quickly answer questions based on our knowledge base. Mm-hmm. And a fourth category that we're just starting to dip our toe into the water of is the one that I think most people think of is chat, right? And actually trying to put virtual agents into use. We are not comfortable yet using generative AI, but in that regard, because of the lack of a human in the loop for some of those use cases. So we are looking to employ various controls and guardrails that can help us to get comfortable there, but that's a new exciting area that we're looking to take advantage of, mm-hmm. But currently not.
Wonderful, thank you. I think just a quick follow-up question. A lot of these use cases you mentioned, I'm sure there are a lot of others out there who are beginning to use them or have been using them. I think the common question that comes up is, how do you measure the impact of these? So are there any standardized metrics that you guys have put in place, and how has the performance been, over the years as you've started using these technologies to, more put into production?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that, as part of my role of a head of product, like any good product manager should, you're very interested in the adoption of your tools that you're putting out there. The specific tools that my team deploy are the platforms, right? So we enable the platforms for teams to leverage generative AI and or to create their own custom generative AI. And so we are connected to various LLM providers. There's a plethora and no shortage of choice. But for those that we have made available, we will measure actually adoption and those that are actually using it, and do take a look at how often are people leveraging those tools. We also, of course, take a look at the cost of each of the choices that they make in terms of which LLM they choose. And we're constantly using that type of information to optimize in terms of which LLM should we be directing folks to, and in which use cases should be using which models in those cases. And of course, there's the more traditional metrics such as response time and more operationally minded ones. I don't know if you'd consider this a metric, but we're certainly also measuring ROI. It's certainly something that's of interest for all of our applications of generative AI and traditional AI ML. And we do have a dedicated group that's connected with our finance department that helps us to frame out things like cost to serve, benefit to actually utilizing the service. And so they'll put calculations together so that we do know the ROI of the use for each of our use cases.
Wonderful. And how would you describe the impact of these technologies on your organization as a whole, at a very high level?
It's been significant. I don't want to share specific numbers, but I will say it's many millions of dollars of return value in terms of expenses saved, productivity gained, or just improved outcomes for our investors, for our internal operations, for our marketing and sales. All have benefited tremendously from our application of both AI and generative AI. Certainly AI is still already on a very steady glide path to realize more and more value year over year, with generative AI quickly coming up the curve as we deploy more and more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Let's switch gears and let's talk some e-commerce from financials. We've got the money. Let's see where we're spending, maybe through Ramesh. So the question I have for you is, in your area of business, if you will, where do you see the biggest adoption? What are some of the projects that you've been driving at eBay?
Yeah, at eBay, we have something called Velocity Initiative, which had been running for the last few years. We want to make our employees very productive. And one of the pillars in the Velocity Initiative is generative AI for developers. So in that, we wanted to kind of see what are the real friction points for the developers to make themselves productive. So some of the key areas that we kind of focused on is kind of building something like a chat application, an internal chat application powered by all internal knowledge, so that the employees can just come and ask questions. So as Sheetal was mentioning, like we have 20 years of knowledge and data. So for any new employees who are coming into the company, it becomes much harder for them to really understand all the terms, all the business logics, everything involved in eBay. So when we power this kind of a chat application with retrieval augmented generation, it becomes much easier for the employees to come and ask questions. And previously we used to like search between like wikis, Stack Overflow, Slack channels, and we don't know where the answer is for a particular question. So, so that's one of the area that we were focusing on. The other area is code generation and code suggestions. So that's another thing where like developers spend most of their time in their IDEs. So how can we really help them on generating some of this code that can be really productive for them? For example, when I was a developer, if I write 100 lines of code, I will spend at least 30 to 40 minutes of writing unit test for that code. So now with generative AI, like I can just right click and use Copilot or our code generation tools and have all the at least like 5 to 10 unit test methods just right there within a minute or within a second. So like I feel so productive when I'm using it. And again, it's not perfect, but even if it is giving a boilerplate code for you to kind of have all the methods and kind of have all the assertions, you can start there. You can, again, like I can see that if there is something like item ID in eBay, it kind of gives me like 1, 2, 3, 4, but it is not perfect. But then you can kind of start writing from there, not writing the boilerplate code. So it's kind of game changer for eBay's developers. And again, like for that, we have used both like GitHub Copilot. Right now, we have thousands of developers across the company using it on a daily basis. And also we have something we have built like a IDE tool that is powered by our own eBay code LLM model that is trained on eBay data. Why? Because like we have so much of frameworks and internal knowledge which Copilot doesn't understand. So we want to make sure like we have both the options for the developers, because like if a developer really wants to know how to connect to an internal database, or how to create an index in an OpenSearch Elastic cluster, which is inside eBay, the models that we train will be knowledgeable to answer those kind of questions. But Copilot as such, like it really simplifies developers' day-to-day activities, like whether it has to like add, whether they want to fix the code, or whether they want to add a documentation or write unit test, it is all in their doorsteps right now.
Wonderful. And I think from a developer's perspective, there's one common question that keeps coming up: build versus buy. So is there any specific strategy that works better for eBay? Do you have any suggestions for the audience?
That was like always biggest question when we start the projects. We had been like into so many of discussions of like looking at every product, whether we want to really buy or build. So, and again, like it's not one-time decision. We have to keep iterating on some of these decisions as we go, because like some decisions that we take would work out and some decision may not. So for example, like for Copilot, we have taken that as kind of a company-wide strategy, and we have adopted across every developer across the company. And we have done that from last year. For something like where Copilot is not really fitting in, that's where we start developing our own like applications as well. So, and also for something like chat application, we cannot go and use something like ChatGPT. We wanted to kind of always have something internal, which is really, we don't want to leak the data as well, right? So we have our own ChatGPT running in our Azure environment, which is private to eBay. So the employees, we encourage them to use that so that the data is not really leaking outside. So for some of those reasons, we definitely want to have something like inbuilt kind of applications. And that kind of helps us in both in kind of governance, and also making sure like we see the gaps and we kind of fill the gaps. And the additional point is like from the vendor products, some of the gaps that we see frictions on our developers or employees, they may not address everything. And sometimes when we use vendor products, we don't have all the metrics down to everything what we want. We won't have it. So those are the pointers that we kind of see, and it's helpful when we build internally as well.
Perfect. Okay, and I think I want to switch gears and talk about adoption rates. You mentioned that is used as a metric to define how successful your POCs, pilots are. And I'm also curious to know, given there's been a lot of discussion about job displacement, right? And there was an earlier conversation about how the world is going to come to an end, people will not have work, and it's going to have political influence as well. So I think whatever you can share publicly, coming from respectable organizations, how do you handle that? I'm sure you've seen efficiency gains, which means more work can be done with less people. So is there new jobs being created, and what kind of jobs are being created? Or is that still work in progress, if you will? Whoever can answer.
I can jump in on that. So I don't think we're seeing displacement as much as we're seeing productivity gains and happier workers in general, right? So there are things that you might label as drudgery and just terrible things that we have to do, mundane tasks that you can just do much faster. So we're certainly seeing happiness from users that are adopting these tools. So it's actually a pretty compelling play to roll out these tools, enable your users and your employees to take advantage of them so they're happier in the work and they're more productive in the work they can do. And what we're seeing is that they can get more work done in a faster amount of time. So that's helping us to be more productive as a company overall.
And attracting more talent, if you will, I guess. So that's what's translating into.
Yeah.
Okay, Ramesh, what's your experience from you?
I see a positive mindset, at least in employees in eBay, like when they're using the technology, they feel very productive, as Mike was saying. And again, like in terms of when we are removing friction with some of these kind of tools, it really kind of gives a positive mindset and kind of happiness and joy. And that's kind of our mantra of like, okay, velocity, when we have that initiative, we want to make sure our developers and employees are kind of happy on their day-to-day work. So, and For example, like if there is something like a support, like we have hundreds of support channels, and the infrastructure teams always come and support into these channels and answering any questions that our developers and employees have. And with our kind of like we extended our chat application into Slack bots, since this is powered by all our internal knowledge, that kind of now answers all the questions across all the Slack channels, support channels now. And that kind of removes friction or like the pain points on both angles. If you see one side of it is like the infrastructure teams, those developers get their time to go and like build better tools for our developers. And developers don't have to really wait for their answers. Like sometimes it's like geographically, we have multiple offices in China, Germany, UK. So if a support engineer is on the other side, we have to wait for many hours to get an answer. So now we end up get it much quicker, and it gives happiness, it gives joy.
Wonderful. Humans in the loop, right? Bringing people together. That's definitely wonderful. I think one other question is, I'll come back to the audience question for sure. Thank you. There is a common debate, I think, in the industry still going on. We don't have an answer yet. When this AI innovation is happening in the companies, does it happen on the edges? It's extremely distributed. Every business unit, every country, every product manager ends up making their own decision, versus having a centralized decision-making entity that is dictating or that is governing how AI innovations should happen across the organization. So I'd love to see, what your experiences have been, again, both in eBay and Vanguard. Whoever wants to go first.
I can go first. That's a very good question. Again, I think I kind of lead the generative AI for developers. I kind of set this basics, but then like what we see is we can build one application as a team, right? But then if it has to really go into multiple teams, what we kind of leverage now is like making sure all these different set of teams who can come up with their own agents. So now what we are trying to do is something like log analysis agent, or something like one of the team had a lot of legacy unit tests and they want to convert into JUnit 5, and they created an agent for that. And there's so many use cases that we haven't even thought about. And like for data analysts, they have something like text to SQL conversion. And for financial people, they wanted an agent for asking questions based on the contracts that we have internally. So all these are different set of use cases, different set of agents, and it's their teams who are really building them. And then what we do, what I made is like, I kind of made it as a platform now. Like this chat application, what we started as a small application, now we have around 2,300 monthly active users answering, just taking developers, we see around 20,000 questions answered. And it is actively used every day. Just extending that traffic coming in and adding more and more agents from all these different set of teams and making them really powerful on what they really want to do for their team, for making their job easier. Because if a team is really working on a particular issue, like kind of Android migration is one of the use cases where they want to convert into Kotlin. And if you kind of create these agents, making it simpler for your team or your use case, then we can just expose that. And what we do is we make sure they have patterns to kind of follow to create these agents, and they have the budget or the access to the GPT-4 turbo model that we have in Azure environment. And the traffic that comes into our application, we kind of use adaptive RAG to kind of classify and route these into these different agents. And that is the way that we wanted to kind of empower everyone.
Centralized platform, but innovation is still on the edges. You're essentially serving as an enablement platform. Related follow-up quick question, and then we'll come back to Mike to hear his perspective. But how do you manage conflicts and how do you prioritize use cases?
So I think from the conflicts perspective, I feel like we have defined the way that we want to progress at this, as I said in the initial ways. So we wanted to kind of start with some of these applications and code suggestion tools. And it's not about conflicts, it's about like discussions of like how we want to progress. Even if the discussion is like build versus buy, there are always discussions on like how you really want to progress, and is this the right path for us to really go, right? And we may not be really perfect in all the decisions, but what we do is like we measure the kind of ROI, and we measure like what is the how we are progressing, kind of in a weekly, monthly basis. We do all the metrics in place and see how the adoption is going, how the developers are using it, what are the kind of feedback. So based on that, like we kind of make decisions.
Got it. Wonderful. Thank you. Mike, same question for you. Where is innovation happening in Vanguard?
As you said, it's happening at the edges. And we firmly believe that the people who know or who will understand the best way to leverage these technologies are on the front lines. It's everyone that's on the phone. It's everyone that's working in investments, right? So when we set out to launch our Gen AI strategy, we wanted to enable a way to collect ideas across the entire enterprise. We've collected, I want to say it's close to 450 different ideas across the company, which can become unwieldy, right?
Yeah.
So we did devise a system to enable triaging and trying to assess these different opportunities for viability. So as much as we'd like to implement every idea that comes in, we do need to make sure that we are deploying this technology in a responsible way, right? So as I mentioned, there's situations where we must have a human in the loop. We must have certain ability to govern and control and make sure that we aren't putting our investors or any of our client data at risk. So we take that funnel that brings in all of those great ideas, and we do allow everyone at the company to experiment, develop, come up with great ideas, do proofs of concepts, so long as they receive initial approval to proceed with a proof of concept. And this is where it gets a little bit more regulated and regimented, because we do have a centralized governance panel that sits within and is run within our Chief Data Analytics office, which is where my organization sits. But we do have cross-functional help to make sure that we are assessing that risk in a responsible way. So we have folks from our information security office, from our technology office that holds the keys to the production kingdom. We need to make sure that we have everyone's view of risk taken into account when we move forward with a use case. But also, we need to make sure that we're trying to put some semblance of deduplication in there for efficiency's sake. So we'll find, particularly within the developer tool space, fantastic ideas coming from all over the place, and we want to encourage that. And there are differences and nuances between the different ideas that come forth, but there are also some that are identical. And so why deploy it more than once? Why have to govern it more than once? Why pay for it more than once? So there are those types of situations where that type of broad outreach to the community results in identifying some deduplication opportunities.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate the unplugged conversation. Let's use the next few minutes. Any questions in the audience, guys? I don't know if you're set up for a mic, but if you can, yes, go ahead. Just go right there. So let me just repeat the question for the audience. 2 questions. What are the most common use cases that you are seeing from your perspective, ready, ripe for adoption? And then second question is, where do you start? Whoever wants to go first.
So from a use cases perspective, when we started with using some of these code generation tools and things like that, the most common use cases that our developers were using it for is creating unit tests, adding documentation, and even doing code reviews. So, and we didn't really expect they will be using so much of Gen AI for doing code reviews, but that really, and we do a lot of brown bags as well to kind of take this idea and kind of implant this across multiple developers. But example that I can tell is a junior engineer kind of writing code, and they're not submitting pull requests to the senior engineers now. So they kind of select the code and they kind of see, okay, is there a way to simplify this code? Is there a way to optimize this code? Or is there any security issues? So the first hand of that review is already done using the using the generative AI tools. And after that, it kind of goes to the senior engineers. So now the senior engineers can really kind of see the functional part of it than the technicality. Like generally, when we used to do code reviews, like we used to check for like null checks. I used to be a Java developer, and null checks and everything. So now we don't really have to do all that. Those are already done in the IDEs itself. And again, that's one of the use cases which I am always passionate about. I want to talk about it. And also we have something like a PR code reviewer where once the developers are creating pull requests, now our PR code reviewer will kind of come in and do the automatic review for them. It does create a summary, and also it kind of gives, these are the lines in the GitHub pull request where it kind of gives suggestions. And there are so many typos that we have seen that it captured till now. And we have a lot of different kind of categories. Okay, these are bug fixes, these are security issues, these are like performance issues and all that. So again, yeah, the major use case that I can think of is some of these unit tests and writing utilities, adding documentation, and even pull request and code reviews.
Perfect. I think in the interest of time, maybe you can take the second question. Where do you start?
Where do you start? So honestly, I think the best way to start is to take a look at the opportunities that your individual company or organization have, right, across the categories I mentioned earlier, right? Because there are certain situations, depending upon your company, if you have a need for content generation, well, you should start in that category and figure out how to leverage the technology there. If you are a code first or a technology first company, certainly developer productivity is a huge area where we've derived and will continue to derive a lot of value. If you are a company that has tremendous amount of information and that is very valuable to your workers, where you need to quickly summarize vast amounts of information, then search and summarize and RAG patterns are the place to start. And I will kind of pivot a little bit on the question, Sheetal, which is just part of the way that a company like my own and maybe many of yours that are under regulation and scrutiny from certain organizations where you must certainly follow certain rules and regulations, and you have data privacy concerns. The best place to start is where the risk is lowest, but the gain is tremendous. And so developer productivity is a great place to start because that's typically pretty low risk. Content generation, these are things that are lower risk, but they enabled us to quickly derive value at low risk and easy to implement requirements and controls. So we felt comfortable dipping our toe in the water there, and I would guess that many of your companies would feel the same.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you very much. I can't see. I'm wearing my glasses. 5 more minutes? Okay, thank you. Any other question from the audience?
Would you like to start?
Do you want to just repeat the question for the audience first?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So I think the gist of it is, how do you measure the before and after impact of developer productivity use cases of generative AI? Is that correct? All right, I'll take a shot at it. So we have done a measurement. It's been good, in terms of just general, like say GitHub Copilot usage, and just seeing the usage and the adoption there, and the overall impact of it has been roughly 5% impact, right? We were able to measure that in terms of surveying the individuals, but also seeing the number of code commits and seeing how quickly things are being committed into the repositories. So that was one way that we were able to measure that productivity gain. The other usage, though, outside of just your traditional uses that typically come to mind, like accelerating a developer's ability to create code or to create unit tests and such, is what I touched on earlier, which is modernizing code, right? So going through code, we've seen 100 times gain in terms of going from weeks to having to go through, someone pouring through a very complicated program to understand what it's doing, to minutes, where you come away from that piece of code with an understanding and annotation that helps that developer understand exactly what that piece of code was doing. So that really helps to accelerate our modernization efforts.
So just to add to that, in eBay, like we kind of see the number of lines of code generated and how many pull requests kind of were kind of increased after kind of use of these tools. And again, there is no single like transfer function for this. And again, we talk about this in every executive meetings. And again, it's very hard to really measure how the employees feel like happiness and things like that. But we do have some of the DX surveys that we run quarterly, and we see whether the numbers are kind of gaining the CSAT scores and things like that. And the other one is like all those chat applications and things like where employees come and ask questions. We have this thumbs up, thumbs down, and we kind of see whether there is a trend of like thumbs up going up, or is there an increase in thumbs down as well. And we see what kind of domains are that, and we can kind of focus on that as well. Again, there is no primary other than adoption kind of metrics and kind of having all these additional lines of codes and things like that. There's no primary thing, but we do have a lot of secondary metrics. Something like even pull request, what we see is after using some of the GenAI tools, we see the merge of these PRs, which are generated after this, is faster. We don't know the science behind it, but we see that is kind of faster. And what does that translate to is like kind of the time taken for the pull request to go to production is much faster now, because the time is like more spent on the review time. So now it is kind of getting merged faster into the master branch. So again, I think it's about seeing those kind of secondary metrics and just validating whether we are at the right kind of direction. And seeing those adoptions and all those increases is what we go after.
All right. Yes, ma'am. I think that's the last question. Let's do it. I think it's a great question. Let me just summarize what I heard was the question is that people, can you start collecting and tracking people who are using Gen AI? What is their performance, how that is changing with the usage of AI, and potentially use that to not only encourage the others to use more of AI and drive adoption, but I think just fundamentally change the way the work is getting done.
So, yeah, one of the things is like we have metrics in place where, as I was telling before, we have how many answers are really getting the thumbs ups, right? We haven't really used that still, but the plans are to kind of get that feedback loop and kind of train or like use those answers to really answer the next set of similar questions. So the first step for us is like to kind of get all the kind of even Slack kind of messages, and wherever the things are answered, we want to take that and first answer. But the future of this is like, yeah, we want to take all the thumbs up kind of answers and use it. That's one. The other one is like we train some of these like large language models based on our code repositories, and we know like what are the accepted suggestions versus like not accepted suggestions. So based on that, we want to kind of continue the training and make sure like those fine tunings of those LLM models are getting those accepted suggestions so that it kind of performs better.